Chapter 13. I woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night. I couldn't remember my nightmare, but knew that I'd had one. My heart was racing. My chest was heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped. I threw off the covers. My fingers found their way to the rose-red lipstick of their own accord. On the other side of the room, Sloane turned over in her bed. I held my breath, waiting to see if she'd wake up. She didn't. As quietly as I could, I slipped out of bed and out of our room. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to breathe. The house was silent as I crept downstairs. I wasn't even sure where I was going until I ended up outside the kitchen door. "I told you, I'm fine." I came to an abrupt halt as the silence in the house gave way to the muted sound of arguing on the other side of the door. "You're not fine, Dean. You're not supposed to be fine with this. I'm not fine with this." Agent Sterling and Dean, they're fighting. I heard the sound of a chair scraping across tile and prepared to retreat. I listened for footsteps, but none were forthcoming. It sounded like someone had just pushed back from the table, angrily. "You left. Dean, you left the FBI. I think we both know why." "I left because I wasn't doing my job, Dean. I was angry. I needed to prove that I wasn't scared, and I got someone killed. Because I couldn't follow the rules. Because Tanner couldn't let even one case go." Tanner was Briggs's first name. The fact that Agent Sterling was using it in a conversation with Dean made me wonder just how much history the two of them shared. This wasn't a conversation you had with a kid you'd met once when you arrested his father. "What was the girl's name?" Dean's voice was lower pitched than Agent Sterling's. I struggled to make out his words as he spoke. "I can't tell you that, Dean." "What was her name?" "You're not authorized to work on active cases. Leave it alone." "You tell me her name, I'll leave it alone." "No, you won't." Agent Sterling's voice was getting harder to decipher. I wondered if she was speaking more softly because the alternative was starting to yell. "I made you a promise once." Dean's voice was controlled. Too controlled. "I kept it. Tell me this girl's name, and I'll promise to leave it alone." My fingers tightened around the tube of lipstick in my hand. Briggs had let me read through Locke's file. I'd memorized the names of every one of her victims. "Isn't it enough that I swore we would take care of this?" Agent Sterling said sharply. "We've got some solid leads. I can't tell you what they are, but I can promise you we have them. It's a copycat, Dean. Paint by numbers. That's all. Daniel Redding is in jail. He's going to be in jail for the rest of his miserable life." "What's her name?" "Why do you need to know?" This time, Agent Sterling's voice got loud enough that I would have heard it even if I hadn't been standing right outside the door. "You tell me that, and I'll answer your question." "I just do." "Not good enough, Dean." Silence. Neither one of them spoke for at least a minute. The sound of my own breathing seemed unbearably loud. I was sure that any second, one of them would come storming out. They'd discover me standing here, listening at the door to a conversation that I knew was more private than anything Dean had told me. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even remember how. "Her name was Gloria." That was Dean, not Sterling, so I wasn't sure who the her in question was. "He introduced her to me. He made her say my name. He asked her if she'd like to be my mom. I was 9. I told him I didn't want a new mother. And he looked at Gloria and said, 'That's a shame.'" "You didn't know." Sterling's voice was quiet again, but still high enough in pitch that the words carried. "And once I did know," Dean replied, his voice on the edge of breaking. "He wouldn't tell me their names." Another torturously long silence. The vicious beating of my own heart drowned out the sound of my breathing. I took a step backward, a tiny, silent step. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be listening to this. I turned, but even with my back to the door, I heard Agent Sterling answer Dean's question. The girl's name was Emerson Cole. Back in my own bed, I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what I'd overheard, as if by pushing it out of my mind, I could make up for the fact that I'd listened at the door for far too long. I failed. Dean and Agent Sterling hadn't just met each other before. They knew each other. They had history. Stop thinking about it, I told myself. Don't do this. I couldn't stop, any more than Sloane would have been able to see a mathematical equation without calculating the answer. Dean made you a promise once, Agent Sterling, and whatever it was, he kept it. The closest I could come to granting Dean privacy was to try getting inside Agent Sterling's head instead of his. You don't like thinking about the Daniel Redding case. You care about Dean. Michael said you're afraid to even look at him, but clearly you don't blame Dean for what his father did. Another implication of their conversation finally sank in. You know that Dean discovered what his father was doing, don't you? You know that Daniel Redding made his son watch. The words Dean had whispered to me the day before. The secret I'd been sure he'd never told anyone. She knew it, too. Somehow, that made it harder to hold on to my resentment against Agent Sterling. You think you can protect him. You think if he doesn't know what's happening, it won't affect him. That's why you didn't want to tell him Emerson's name. If Agent Sterling knew him so well, if she cared about Dean so much, why couldn't she see that it was the not knowing that was going to kill him? It didn't matter if this killer was just a copycat. The fact that Dean had needed to know the girl's name told me he wouldn't be able to make that separation in his mind. He'd blame himself for this girl, the way he blamed himself for all the others. I told him I didn't want a new mother. And Daniel Redding had replied, that's a shame. In Dean's mind, and maybe in his father's, at least one of Daniel Redding's victims had died because she wouldn't make a suitable replacement mother for Dean. Because Dean had said he didn't want her. So much for my resolution to stick to profiling Sterling instead of Dean. Thwap. A small, cold projectile hit me in the side of the head. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it, and then, thwap. I opened my eyes, turned toward the door, and wiped the side of my face, which was damp. By the time my eyes had adjusted to the light, I'd been pelted for a third time. Leah! I hissed, keeping my voice to a whisper to avoid waking Sloane. Quit throwing ice at me! Leah popped a piece of ice into her mouth and rolled it around with her tongue. Without a word, she beckoned me into the hallway. Fairly certain she would continue throwing ice at me until I agreed, I rolled out of bed and followed her into the hall. She closed the bedroom door behind us and pulled me into the nearby bathroom. Once she'd locked that door, she flipped the light switch on, and I realized that, in addition to the cup of ice she held in her left hand, she held a sparkly mint green shirt in her right. My eyes went from the clothes in Leah's hands to the clothes she was wearing. Black leather pants and a silver top that was held in place by a chain around her neck and had no back whatsoever. What are you wearing? I asked. Leah answered my question with an order. Put this on. She thrust the shirt at me. I took a step back. Why? Because, Leah said, like the two of us hadn't fought twice in the past 48 hours. You can't go to a Colonial University frat party dressed in your pajamas. A frat party? I repeated. Then the rest of her statement sunk in. Colonial University, the scene of the crime. This is a bad idea, I told Leah. Judd would kill us. Not to mention the fact that Agent Sterling's already on the warpath, and all Sloan and I did was build a mock-up of the crime scene in the basement. Sloan built a mock-up of the crime scene, Leah corrected. You didn't do anything other than get caught. You're a crazy person, I told Leah, struggling to keep my voice to a whisper. You want us to sneak out of the house to attend a college frat party at a university where there is an ongoing FBI investigation. Forget about Judd and Agent Sterling. Briggs would kill us. Only if we get caught, Leah retorted. And unlike certain redheads in this room, I specialize at not getting caught. Put on the dress, Cassie. What dress? Leah held up the glittery thing I'd mistaken for a shirt. This dress. There's no world in which that is long enough to be a dress. It is a dress. In fact, as of this moment, it's your dress, which you are going to put on without complaining because frat boys are more talkative when you're showing a little leg. I inhaled, preparing to counter Leah's statement with one of my own, but she took a step forward, invading my personal space and pushing me back against the bathroom counter. You're the profiler, she said. You tell me how okay Dean is going to be if the FBI botches this case. Then tell me that you are 100% certain that we won't pick up on something they miss. The FBI had profilers and interrogators. Those agents had training. They had experience. They had 1,000,001 things that we didn't. But no one had instincts like ours. That was the whole point of the program. That was the reason Judd was afraid that if the FBI started using us on active cases, they wouldn't be able to stop. Who do you think college students are going to get chatty with? Leah asked me. FBI agents? Or two scantily clad and passably nubile teenage girls? Even setting aside our abilities, Leah was right. No one would suspect we were part of the investigation. They might tell us something the FBI didn't know. If Sterling implied that she could, in any way, get the director to disband this program, she was lying. I can guarantee you that's outside her purview. At most, she could send one of us home. And I would bet you a lot of money that the director wouldn't let her send you home, because you're a nice, shiny alternative to Dean, who the director has never trusted and never liked. Leah took a step back, allowing me some breathing room. You say you care about Dean, she told me, her voice low. You say you want to help. This will help. I'd lie to you about a lot of things, Cassie, but helping Dean isn't one of them. I wouldn't do this for you, or for Michael, or even for Sloan. But I would waltz into Hades and make nice with the devil himself for Dean. So either you put on the damn dress, or you get the hell out of my way. I put on the dress. Are you sure this isn't a shirt? I asked, eyeing the hemline. Leah manhandled my face and slathered it with base before brandishing a tube of pink lip gloss and a container of black mascara. It's a dress, she swore. It was times like these I really wished Leah weren't a compulsive liar. How are we even getting to this party? I asked. Leah smirked. It just so happens I know a boy with a car. Chapter 14. Michael's Porsche was a remnant of his life before the program. Watching him behind the wheel, it was easy to picture the person he'd been then, the trust fund brat bouncing from one boarding school to another, summering in the Hamptons, jetting out to St. Bart's or St. Lucia for a long weekend. It was easy to picture that Michael bouncing from girl to girl. Leah sat in the front seat beside him. She was leaning back, the leather seat caressing her cheek, her long hair whipping in the wind. She'd rolled down her window and showed no signs of wanting to roll it back up. Every once in a while, her gaze flitted over to Michael. I wished I could read the inscrutable expression on Leah's face. What was she thinking? When she looked at Michael, What did she feel? Michael kept his eyes locked on the road. As hard as I tried not to profile the two of them, I kept thinking that Leah was the one who'd asked Michael to join us on this ill-advised outing, and that he'd agreed to help her. Why? Because opportunities for trouble were not to be missed. Because he owed her. Because as much as Michael enjoyed jabbing at Dean, he didn't like watching him bleed. The answers flooded my brain, and Michael caught my gaze in the rearview mirror. He told me once that when I was profiling someone, my eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "We'll want to make a quick detour," Leah said. Michael glanced over at her, and she gestured with the tip of one dark purple nail. "Pull off at the next exit." She glanced back at me. "Enjoying the ride?" She was in the front seat. I was in the back. "I'm not doing this for enjoyment," I told her. She let her gaze trail from me to Michael and then back again. "No," she agreed. "You're not doing this for enjoyment. You're doing it for Dean." Leah lingered on Dean's name just slightly longer than the other words in that sentence. Michael's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Leah wanted him to know I was doing this for Dean. She wanted him dwelling on that fact. "Gas station," Leah directed, her hair whipping in the wind. He pulled in and threw the car into park. Leah smiled. "You two, wait here." It was just like her to stir things up and then leave. No matter how well he masked it, I knew Michael was sitting there asking himself what, exactly, had led me to do this for Dean. The same way I'd spent the ride wondering why Michael had said yes to Leah. "Ta," Leah said, sounding fairly satisfied with herself. In an impressive feat of flexibility, she snaked her body out the open window without ever opening the door. "This is a bad idea," I said as Leah sauntered toward the mini-mart. "Almost certainly," Michael agreed. From the back seat, I couldn't see his face, but it was all too easy to imagine the unholy glint in his eyes. "We snuck out of the house to go to a frat party," I said. "And I'm pretty sure this isn't a dress." Michael turned around in his seat, took in the view, and smiled. "Green's a good color for you." I didn't reply. "Now it's your turn to say something about the way this shirt really brings out my eyes." Michael sounded so serious that I couldn't help cracking a smile. "Your shirt is blue. Your eyes are hazel." Michael leaned toward me. "You know what they say about hazel eyes." Leah opened the passenger door and flopped back into her seat. "No, Michael. What do they say about hazel eyes?" She smirked. "Did you get what you needed?" Michael asked her. Leah handed a brown paper bag back to me. I opened it. "Red Gatorade in cups?" Leah shrugged. "When in Rome, do as the Romans do. When at a frat party, drink questionable fruit punch out of a red Solo cup." Leah was right about the punch, and the cups. It was dark enough in the dimly lit frat house that no one noticed that our drinks were a slightly different shade of red. "What now?" I asked Leah over the deafening music. She began to move her hips, and her upper body followed suit in a way that made it fairly clear that she'd excel at limbo. She eyed a trio of boys at the edge of the room and shoved Michael toward a blonde girl with red-rimmed eyes. "Now," she said, "we make friends." A profiler, an emotion reader, and a lie detector went to a party. An hour later, Michael had identified the people in the room who seemed hardest hit by the murder that had rocked the campus. We'd found a few partiers who were upset for other reasons, including, but not limited to, unrequited crushes and backstabbing roommates. But there was a certain combination of sorrow, fascination, and fear that Michael had zeroed in on as marking someone a person of interest. Unfortunately, most of our persons of interest had nothing interesting to say. Leah had danced with at least half the boys in the room and spotted at least 36 lies. Michael was playing sympathetic ear to the female half of the student population. I stuck to the edges, nursing my fake punch and turning a profiler's eye on the college students crammed into the frat house like jelly beans in a guess-how-many jar. It felt like Colonial's entire student body had showed up, and based on the general lack of sobriety, I was certain that none of them were drinking Gatorade. People mourn in their own ways. A boy sidled up next to me. He was just shy of 6 feet tall and dressed entirely in black. There was a hint of a goatee on his chin, and he was wearing plastic-rimmed glasses that I deeply suspected weren't prescription. We're young. We're not supposed to die. Getting wasted on cheap alcohol is their misguided attempt at reclaiming the illusion of immortality. Their attempt, I said, trying to look like I found him intriguing, and not like I was thinking that there was a 40% chance he was a philosophy major and a 40% chance he was pre-law. But not yours? I'm more of a realist, the boy said. People die. Young people, pretty people, people who have their whole lives in front of them. The only real immortality is doing something worth remembering. Definitely a philosophy major. Any second, he was going to start quoting someone. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. And there it was. The challenge to getting information out of this guy wouldn't be getting him to talk. It would be getting him to actually say something. Did you know her? I asked. Emerson Cole? This guy wasn't one of the students Michael had picked out, but I knew before he responded that the answer would be yes. He wasn't mourning Emerson, but he'd known her all the same. She was in my class. The boy adopted a serious expression and leaned back against the wall. Which class? Monsters are men, the boy replied. Professor Fogel's class? I took it last year. Now, I'm the TA. Fogel's writing a book, you know. I'm his research assistant. I tried to catch Leah's eye on the dance floor. Professor Fogel was a person of interest in Emerson's murder. He taught a class on serial killers, and somehow his teaching assistant had found me. He likes being the pursuer, I thought, watching Leah dancing her way through the frat boys, listening for lies. Not the pursued. Did you know her? The boy asked, suddenly turning the tables on me. Emerson, did you know her? No, I said, unable to keep from thinking of the lengths Dean had gone just to learn her name. I guess you could say she was a friend of a friend. You're lying. The boy reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. It took everything in me not to pull away. I consider myself an excellent judge of character. You consider yourself excellent at everything, I thought. You're right, I said, fairly certain those were his favorite words. I don't even go to school here. You saw the story on the news, the boy said, and you decided to come check it out. Something like that. I ran through everything I knew about him and settled on playing to his supposed expertise. I heard that the professor's a person of interest because of that class he's teaching. Your class. The boy shrugged. There was one lecture in particular. I took a step forward, and the boy's eyes darted down to my legs. The outfit Leah had picked for me left very little to the imagination. Behind him, I caught sight of Michael, who pointed at the boy and raised his eyebrows. I didn't nod to tell him that I had a promising lead. I didn't have to. Michael saw the answer in my face. I could show you the lecture in question. The boy lifted his gaze from my legs to my face. I have all of Professor Fogel's slides on my laptop. And, he added, I have a key to the lecture hall. The boy dangled said key in front of me. It'll be just like sitting in on the class. Unless you'd rather stay here and drown your sorrows with the masses. I met Michael's eyes over the boy's head. Follow me, I thought. hoping he'd somehow manage to read my intention in the set of my features. This is too good to pass up. Chapter 15. Take a seat. I'll get the lights. The boy's name was Jeffrey, with a G. That was how he'd introduced himself on the way to the lecture hall, like it would have been a tragedy if I'd mistakenly thought he was Jeffrey with a J. I wasn't about to turn my back on a boy who'd lured me away from a frat party, so I waited for Jeffrey with a G to turn the lights on, my back to the wall. The lights flickered overhead, and then the auditorium was flooded with light. Hundreds of old-fashioned wooden desks sat in perfect rows. At the front of the room, there was a stage. Jeffrey walked backward down the aisle. Getting cold feet? He asked me. Criminology isn't for everyone. Most people would have stopped there. Jeffrey didn't. I'm pre-law. Philosophy minor? I couldn't help asking. He paused and gave me an odd look. Double major. Eyes on mine, Jeffrey climbed onto the stage and plugged his laptop into the projector. Who brings their laptop to a frat party? I answered my own question. A person who was planning on bringing a girl back here for the show all along. I took a seat, still on guard, but less wary. Jeffrey wasn't our unsub. He was so high on himself that I couldn't imagine him needing the validation of the kill. Then again, I also hadn't sensed that need in Locke. Hope we're not late. Michael's voice echoed cheerfully through the auditorium. He'd followed me. Good. On the stage, Jeffrey frowned. I turned in my seat to see that Michael hadn't come alone. There was a girl with him. Pretty, blonde, and curvy, with hipster glasses of her own. Jeffrey. Bryce. Clearly, Jeffrey with a G and hipster girl knew each other. Jeffrey sighed. Veronica, this is Bryce. Bryce, this is Veronica. Leave it to Michael to follow us and bring reinforcements. Reinforcements who knew Jeffrey, and, unless I was mistaken, didn't like him very much. Michael must have plucked her from the crowd the moment she saw Jeffrey leave with me. Nice to meet you, I told Bryce. She wound her arm around Michael's waist. Seeing her touch him was 1,000 times worse than watching Michael with Leah. At least Leah was ours. Jeff, Bryce said, relishing having Michael on her arm and purposefully shortening Jeffrey's name in a way designed to annoy him. This is Tanner. We're here for the show. I caught Michael's eye and had to duck my head to keep from bursting out laughing. I'd chosen Agent Sterling's first name as my alias, and Michael had chosen Agent Briggs. You weren't invited, Jeffrey told Bryce, his voice flat. Bryce shrugged and flopped down in a seat across the aisle from me. I doubt you'd want Professor Fogel to know that there was a show, she said, in a way that left very little doubt that she'd been in my shoes, the recipient of Jeffrey's little show, before. Fine, Jeffrey said, capitulating. He turned to me. Bryce is in my class, he explained. Then, for Michael's benefit, he added, I'm the teaching assistant. Michael smirked. Nice. Yeah, Jeffrey replied tersely. It is. I was talking about your goatee. Michael played casually with the tips of Bryce's hair. I shot him a look. Challenging TA Jeff could work in our favor, but not if Jeff got annoyed enough to kick Michael out. After a tense moment, Jeffrey decided to ignore Michael and Bryce and got on with the show. Welcome to Psych 315, Monsters Are Men, the Psychology of Serial Murder. Jeffrey's voice carried across the auditorium, and I could practically hear the man he was channeling. Jeffrey's expression changed as he walked across the stage and flipped from slide to slide. Body after body after body. The images flashed across the screen in rapid succession. People define humanity by its achievements, by the Mother Teresas and the Einsteins and the everyday Joes playing hero in their own ways 1,000 times a day. When tragedy strikes, when someone does something so awful that we can't even wrap our minds around it, we pretend like that person isn't human. Like there's not a continuum from us to them. Like the everyday Joe isn't a villain in 1,000 small ways every day. There's a reason we can't look away from a train wreck. A reason we watch the news when a body turns up. A reason that the world's most infamous serial killers get hundreds of thousands of letters every year. Jeffrey was reading the words. As well as he delivered them, he wasn't the one who'd written this speech. I turned my attention to the man who had. I could tell, by listening to Jeffrey parrot his words, that Professor Fogel was a larger-than-life figure. Based on the size of this room, his class was a popular one. He was a storyteller, and he had a fascination for the subject matter, a fascination he was convinced the rest of humanity shared. The philosopher Fred Nietzsche said that anyone who fought monsters had to fight becoming a monster himself. If you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. Jeffrey paused on a slide that included dozens of pictures, not of bodies, but of men. I recognized some of them. They lined our walls at home, smiling out at us from frames, a constant reminder that the kind of monster we hunted could be anyone. Your neighbor, your father, your friend, your aunt. Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, son of Sam. Jeffrey paused for effect. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. These names mean something to us. This semester, we'll touch on all of the above, but we're going to start closer to home. The other pictures disappeared, replaced by a man with dark brown hair and eyes the exact same shade. He looked normal, nondescript, harmless. Daniel Redding, Jeffrey said. I stared at the picture, looking for a resemblance to the boy I knew. I've studied the Redding case for the past 4 years, Jeff continued. And by I, he means the professor. I heard Bryce stage whisper to Michael. Jeffrey with a G ignored her. Redding is responsible for a minimum of 12 murders over a 5-year period, beginning with his wife's desertion, days before his 29th birthday. The bodies were recovered from Redding's farm over a 3-day excavation period subsequent to his arrest. 3 more victims fitting his MO were identified across state lines. A crime scene photo flashed up onto the screen. A woman, long dead, hung from a ceiling fan. I recognized the rope, black nylon. Her arms were bound behind her back. Her legs were bound together. The floor beneath her was soaked with blood. Her shirt was torn, and underneath it, I could see cuts. Some long and deep, some shallow, some short. But the thing that drew my eyes was the burn on her shoulder, just under her collarbone. The skin was an angry red, welted, blistered, and raised in the shape of an R. This was what Dean's father had done to those women. This was what he'd made Dean watch. Bind them, brand them, cut them, hang them. Jeffrey clicked through a series of enlarged images of the woman's body. That was Redding's modus operandi, or M.O. Listening to Jeffrey use the technical terms made me want to smack him. He didn't know what he was talking about. These were just pictures to him. He didn't know what it was like to discover a loved one missing, or to crawl into the mind of a killer. He was a little boy playing at something he didn't understand. Coincidentally, Bryce cut in, that's also the title of Professor Fogel's book. He's writing a book? I asked. On the Daniel Redding case, Jeffrey answered. Clearly, he wasn't about to let his spotlight be usurped. You can see why he's a person of interest in Emerson's murder. She was branded, you know. You said she was in this class. You knew her. My voice was flat. The fact that Jeffrey could talk so casually about the murder of a girl he knew made me reconsider my earlier analysis. Maybe he would have been capable of murder. Jeffrey met my eyes. "People mourn in different ways," he said. I might have been imagining it, but I saw the barest hint of a smile around the edges of his lips. "She was in my small group," Bryce volunteered, "for our end-of-semester project. The professor assigned the groups. Emerson was nice, perky even. I mean, who's perky in a class about serial killers? But Emerson was. She was nice to everyone. One of the guys in our group, you should see him. He's like a roly-poly. You say anything to him and he just curls into a metaphorical ball. But Emerson could actually get him to talk. And Derek, the other boy in our group, he's that guy. You know, the obnoxious, if you don't know who that guy is in your section, then chances are good that you are that guy. That's Derek. But Emerson could actually get him to shut up, just by smiling." Bryce couldn't match Jeffrey's detached tone. She was upset about what had happened to Emerson. This wasn't just a performance to her. She leaned into Michael. "Emerson didn't show up for our exam." Jeffrey closed his laptop. "Professor Fogel was out sick. I printed off the test that morning, one for every student in the class. Emerson was the only one who didn't show. I thought she was—" Jeff cut off. "Never mind." "You thought she was what?" Michael asked. Jeffrey narrowed his eyes. "What does it matter?" It mattered. But before I could come up with a rational explanation for needing the information, Michael's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read a text, and then stood. "Sorry, Bryce," he said. "I have to go." Bryce shrugged. Clearly, she wasn't going to be pining away for him anytime soon. Michael turned toward the door, catching my eye as he passed. "Leah," he mouthed. "I should go too," I said. "This was intense." "You're leaving?" Jeffrey sounded genuinely surprised. Apparently, he'd been under the impression that he had this one in the bag. Dead girl, freaky lecture, sensitive eyes. Clearly, I was supposed to be his for the taking. "Tell you what," I told him, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. "Why don't you give me your number?" Chapter 16. Leah's text didn't lead us back to the party. Apparently, she hadn't been quite as cautious as I was about going off with her quarry alone. "What exactly did Leah say?" I asked. Michael held up his phone for my inspection. There was an off-center picture of Leah with two college boys, one tall, one round, both slightly out of focus. "Having a fascinating chat." I read the accompanying text. "Heron Hall roof." I paused. What's she doing on the roof of some random building? "Interrogating suspects who don't know they're being interrogated?" Michael suggested, an edge creeping into his voice. "Any chance the boys in the picture aren't suspects?" I wanted to believe that Leah wouldn't go off alone with someone she thought might be capable of murder. Maybe they're just friends of Emerson's. "She sent a picture," Michael replied flatly. "In case something happens," I filled in. Leah had sent us a picture of the boys she was talking to, in case we got to the roof of Heron Hall and she was gone. We shouldn't have left her at that party alone. I'd been so caught up in getting information out of Jeffrey that I hadn't even told Leah I was leaving. Leah did a very good impression of someone who could take care of herself, but Leah could do a good impression of just about anything. Dean wouldn't have left her, I thought, unable to stop myself. That was why he was the one person in this world that she'd walk through fire for, and Michael and I didn't make the cut. I walked faster. "She'd mock us for worrying," Michael said, as much to himself as to me. "Either that or she'd take it as a personal insult." He picked up his own pace. With each step, I imagined the ways this could go badly. Leah was ours. She had to be okay. Please be okay. Finally, we made it to Heron Hall. The tower-like building was clearly Gothic in design, and just as clearly, it was closed and locked down for the evening. No trespassing. Michael didn't miss a beat at the sign. Do you want to trespass first, or should I? I heard Leah laughing before I saw her. It was a light, almost bell-like sound, musical and delighted, and almost certainly a lie. A step in front of me, Michael opened the door onto the roof. After you, he said. My stomach muscles unknotted themselves slowly as I stepped out and into the moonlit night. My eyes searched for Leah. Once I'd seen for myself that she was okay, I registered the fact that her flair for fashion apparently extended to her choice of rendezvous points. Not just a tower, not just a locked tower, but the roof of a locked tower. From here, we could see the entire campus stretched out below, a splattering of lights in the darkness. From the other side of the roof, Leah spotted us. There were 2 people with her, both of them male. You made it, she said, weaving on her feet toward us in a way that would have made me nervous even if we'd been on solid ground. Don't worry, Leah whispered, throwing her arms around me like the very happiest of drunks. I'm on the clock. Nothing but Gatorade since we arrived. And if anyone asks, my name is Sadie. Leah turned back toward the boys. I followed her, unable to keep from thinking that Sadie was Leah's real name. None of us knew why she'd changed it. Only Leah would use the name she'd been born with as her fake name. Derek, Clark, this is... Leah hiccuped, and Michael took that cue to take over the introductions. Tanner, he said, sticking out his hand to shake the others. And this is Veronica. The boy on the left was tall and preppy, with politician hair and classically handsome features. There was a distinct chance that he was flexing his pecs. I'm Derek, he said, slipping his hand into mine. Definitely flexing, I thought. Derek elbowed the boy on the right, hard enough that the boy actually stumbled. Once he regained his footing, he held out his hand. Clark, he mumbled. You sound like a duck, Derek told him. Clark, Clark, Clark. I ignored Derek and focused on Clark. His handshake was surprisingly firm, but his hands themselves were soft. In fact, soft was the best adjective to describe him. He was small and round, and looked like he'd been made out of clay that had never quite set. His skin was blotchy, and it took him several seconds to actually meet my eye. Suddenly, it clicked. Derek, I said. And Clark. Hadn't Bryce said that one of the guys she was assigned to work with in the Monsters or Men class was named Derek? And the other reminded her of a roly-poly. How in the world had Leah managed this? She met my eyes slyly, and I realized that I'd underestimated her. I shouldn't have, not when the reason she was doing all of this was Dean. Brilliant deduction, Derek told me, with a trademark smile that he'd probably practiced in the mirror. Call Mensa, he said. This girl's a genius. The patronizing tone in his voice told me that he didn't expect me to recognize the put-down for what it was. I suddenly knew exactly what Bryce had meant when she'd described him as that guy. He almost certainly came from a wealthy family. I was going to guess a long line of successful lawyers, most likely with an Ivy League pedigree. He liked the sound of his own voice even more than Jeffrey did. He was the type who'd debate an issue in class just to prove that he was the better man. He probably whitened his teeth. Clark and Derek knew that girl, Leah said, slurring the words. I met Derek at the party. He called Clark. I asked him to. She leaned into Derek's chest and reached a hand out to Clark's cheek. Clark flushed a brilliant red. Derek nodded at me over Leah's head, as if her presence on his chest was proof that I should want to be there too. I was officially never wearing this dress again. What girl? I asked. The girl who got killed, Derek answered. Emmy. Emerson, Clark muttered. What was that, Clark? Derek said, shooting the rest of us a grin, like Clark's inability to speak up was the world's cleverest joke. Her name was Emerson, Clark said, flushing even brighter than he had when Leah had touched him. That's what I said. Derek raised one of his palms upward in a gesture I translated to mean roughly, "What's this guy's problem?" "Meh. What are you gonna do?" Clark mumbled something in reply. Derek ignored him. "She was in our class," Derek told me. "I think I met your TA tonight." I measured their responses to that. Derek stiffened. Clark didn't appear to move at all. Beside me, I could practically feel Michael cataloging every detail of their expressions. "That guy's a tool," Derek replied. Quite frankly, I thought that tools who lived in tool houses probably shouldn't throw stones. "Jeffrey seemed into death," I said. Like, really into death. And the way he talked about Emerson, it was like he didn't even care. Agreeing with Derek was like throwing water onto a grease fire. It just made this situation that much worse. "T.A. Jeff thinks that frowning and wearing black is a substitute for genuine intelligence. I bet he told you he knew Emerson." I nodded, willing to see where this was going. "He didn't know her," Derek said. "He just sits up at the front of the class and grades papers. Clark and I, we knew her." He leaned back on his heels. "That stuck-up blonde chick in our group, she knew her. Hey, even Fogel knew her. But T.A. Jeff is just blowing smoke." "What do you mean, Fogel knew her?" Michael asked. "Isn't it a pretty large class?" Derek turned his attention to Michael. Whatever he saw there, he liked. Given Michael's background, he'd probably known a dozen Dereks growing up. "When I say that the professor knew Emmy, I mean that he really knew her," Derek said. "Biblically." I looked at Leah. She nodded slightly. Derek was telling the truth. Beside her, Clark's face was growing red again. "The dead girl was involved with the professor," Michael said. "That kind of thing could get a guy fired." "No kidding. Person of interest?" Derek scoffed. "Try he did it." Derek laughed under his breath. "He did her, and then he did it." "Shut up," Clark said, the words exploding out of his mouth as his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You don't know what you're talking about." He sucked in air like he'd just run a mile. She wasn't like that." "Whoa there, buddy." Derek held up both palms this time. I didn't bother mentally translating the gesture. "Simmer down. I get it. Don't speak ill of the dead." Derek turned back to the rest of us and proceeded to continue blessing us with his wisdom. "I promise you, once the police find Fogel, the university will be looking for a replacement teacher for our class. Guy's guilty." Derek blanched. "I hope they don't hand the class over to T.A. Jeff." Beside him, Clark sucked in another audible breath. Leah met my eyes, then Michael's. We'd gotten what we came for. And more. Chapter 17. The ride home was quiet. Leah was in the back, her legs stretched out the length of the seat. Michael was driving the speed limit. I stared out the window into the black. "That actually went better than I expected it to," Leah said finally. "If we can sneak back in without getting caught, I'm willing to call it a win." "I thought you never got caught," I told her, pulling my eyes away from the window and turning to look at her. Leah inspected her fingernails. "We live in a house with a trained FBI agent and a former military sniper. I'm stealthy, not magic. Call it an acceptable risk." That was a very different tune than the one she'd been singing when she talked me into this. "Are you sorry you came?" Leah gave me a pointed look. "Or, given the opportunity, would you do it all over again?" I couldn't be sorry I'd agreed to this. We'd learned too much. "What did you think of the TA?" I asked Michael. "Yes," Leah said, yawning and fanning her hand over her mouth. Do tell, Michael. What did you think of the TA who was such a promising lead that Cassie left the party to go with him, with you on her heels? That was the first time Leah had referenced the fact that we'd left her. She tossed the words off like she couldn't be bothered to care. The guy was looking at Cassie like she was some kind of specimen under a glass. Michael eyed Leah in the rearview mirror. You really think I should have let him take her off alone? I'm surprised, that's all. Leah executed an elaborate shrug. I mean, following Cassie worked out so well for you last time. The last time Michael had followed me, he'd gotten shot. I deserved that. For leaving her at the party, for not even thinking twice about it. I deserved whatever verbal darts she threw out. We shouldn't have left you there, I said. Please. Leah closed her eyes, like this whole conversation was boring her to tears. I can take care of myself, Cassie. I saw you leaving. I could have joined you. I chose not to. And if Michael had bothered asking, I would have told him to go with you. I told you to stay at the party, Michael muttered. Excuse me? Leah shot back. What was that? I texted you when I left. You were supposed to stay at the party. Michael slammed the heel of his hand into the steering wheel, and I jumped. But no, you went off with not one, but two strange witnesses, Leah supplied. Trust me, I had a handle on it. I could handle the Derricks and Clarks of the world in my sleep. I read more into those words than I would have a week ago. Leah was certain she could handle the Derricks and Clarks of the world, because in all likelihood, she'd seen and handled much, much worse. Now, Michael, dearest, Leah continued, her words designed to grate. Concentrate. Cassie's TA. What were your impressions? Michael ground his teeth for a moment, but eventually answered. He wasn't happy when I showed up. He was even less happy to see me with Bryce. I caught a flash of guilt when he saw her, followed by possession, condescension, and titillation. I said a brief and silent thanks that Michael had been focused on Jeffrey's reaction to seeing him with Bryce, and not mine. Jeffrey considers himself above it all. I forced myself to focus on the issue at hand. He likes holding a position of power in the class. I paused, sorting through my impressions of him. He chose me because I look young. He expected me to lap up every word of that lecture, to be a little bit afraid of him, but also drawn to the things he could teach me. A leader in search of followers? Leah said. What does that make the professor? If I had to guess, I told her, drumming my fingers contemplatively against the side of my seat. I'd say that Professor Fogel has a magnetic personality. Jeffrey was reading his lecture slides. The professor is a performer. And if Derek was telling the truth about Emerson's relationship with Professor Fogel, he was, Leah confirmed. The good professor is not opposed to groupies. I turned that over in my mind. That's part of what attracts him to this area of study. It's there in the title of his class. These men are larger than life. They're legends. They're the train wreck we can't stop watching. The forbidden, dangerous other. Michael accepted my appraisal at face value. I'd have to see the man to tell you anything about him, he said. That was one of the key differences between Michael's ability and mine. Michael read people. I read personalities and behaviors. And I didn't always need a person present to do it. But I can tell you that T.A. Jeff enjoyed talking about Redding's M.O. just a little too much, Michael continued. He wanted to see an expression of horror on Cassie's face, and when he didn't get it, he turned the topic to Emerson. And what did his face tell you about Emerson? Leah asked. No guilt, Michael reported. Not even sadness. A tiny sliver of fear, satisfaction, and loyalty. Loyalty? I asked. To whom? I truly hate to say it, Leah said with a sigh. But Derek might have been right. Maybe the professor is our guy. The entire time I was talking to the dynamic duo of God's gift to the planet and the blushing wonder, I only caught one interesting untruth. Derek? I guessed. Clark. There was no question in Michael's voice. When he was talking about Emerson. Point to the emotion reader, Leah drawled. Their gifts overlapped with each other's more than either's overlapped with mine. When Clark said that Emerson wasn't like that, he was lying. Leah twirled her ponytail around her index finger. If you ask me, Clark knew that she was doing the horizontal mambo with Professor Creepy. I turned to Michael. What did you see? In Clark? Michael pulled off the highway. Soon we'd be home. I saw longing, he said. Fear of rejection. He flicked his eyes over to mine. Rage. Not just anger, but rage. At Derek for speaking badly about a girl that Clark had cared about? At us for asking the questions? At the professor? At Emerson? So what do we do now? I asked. Assuming we don't get caught the second we get home. We need to figure out if the FBI knows about Emerson's relationship with the professor. Leah flicked her hair back over her shoulder. If they don't, we have to find a way of passing that information on. What about Dean? I asked. We don't tell Dean. Leah's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a whip. He needs this case solved. He doesn't need to know what we'll do to see that happen. Dean wouldn't understand why we would go out on a limb for him, because deep down, he believed he wasn't worth saving. He would have taken a bullet for any of us, but he wouldn't want us risking anything for him. Most people built walls to protect themselves. Dean did it to protect everyone else. For once, Leah and I were in total agreement. We don't tell Dean.